The accessory organs of the integumentary system are the hair, the nails, and the glands. Let's start with a closer look at the hairs. Hairs are produced by hair follicles, which are modified epidermal cells. There are some of the epithelial cells from the epidermis that reach down into the dermis or all the way into the hypodermis to produce the hair follicle, from which the hair grows. The part of the hair that we see above the surface of the skin is called the shaft, and this is made of packed bundles of keratin left behind by dead cells. If we go to the section that's found in the skin, that's the hair root, and again, it's made of dead cells full of keratin. These cells arise from the hair bulb. The hair bulb is the actual living part of the hair. It contains cells that actively divide to make new cells, and as they do that, they push the older cells upward to form the root and eventually the shaft of the hair. In order to be able to continue to divide like this, the cells of the hair bulb need a supply of nutrients. And there's a special extension of the dermis called the dermal papilla that reaches up into the hair bulb. This contains the blood vessels that are supplying the nutrients to the live cells of the hair bulb so that they can continue dividing. The hair is also associated with what's called a hair receptor. There are neurons that have dendrites attached to the hair, and when something moves the hair, it pulls on the receptor and sends a signal through the nervous system telling us that something has touched the hair. And that provides some additional sensation associated with the skin, specifically with the movement of the hairs. Also associated with the hair is the piloerector muscle. This is a small bit of smooth muscle that's connected to the hair follicle. And when it's stimulated to contract, it pulls against the follicle and lifts the hair. This usually happens in response to fear or in response to cold. Given how fine the hair is on most human skin, there's not a lot of function to this any longer. But evolutionarily, this can provide an advantage in either making someone look bigger as the hair stands up, or in helping to trap more air near the skin that can be warmed as a layer of insulation. Overall, the functions of the hairs include sensation, we can feel things that move the hairs, insulation by providing a little bit of warmth, especially with the hairs on the head that are a little bit thicker and can provide warmth, and protection, a layer of physical protection against damage, and also for protection against the intrusion of things that don't belong. We have hairs in our ear, in our noses, and our eyelashes that help to keep particles out of those openings to the body. And our eyebrows help keep us sweat from getting into our eyes. Hair also has a social function. As modern humans, we can use changes to our hair to express something about ourselves. And evolutionarily, the presence or absence of hair could help with the recognition of the sexes, so to determine male versus female based on the presence of a beard, or to determine sexual maturity. This has an advantage if you're looking at a person in the distance and you want to know if they're a potential mate. You'd be looking for the right sex and, hopefully, sexual maturity, as evidenced by the presence of hair on the beard or in the armpits or the groin area. The finger and toenails are similar to the hairs in that they are also made of tightly packed bundles of keratin. The keratin fibers are arranged in parallel and connected tightly together, which gives us the very hard structure to the nails. The part of the nail that we can see is called the nail plate or the nail body. This is made of translucent keratin, so we can see through it a little bit, and that's what gives nails their pink color. We can see the capillaries that are underneath the actual nail plate. The part of the nail that's found under the skin is called the nail root, just like the hair root was the part of the hair that was in the skin. And the nail matrix is what's similar to the hair bulb. The nail matrix is what contains the modified epidermal cells, the epithelial cells, that actually divide to create the nail itself. The proximal nail fold is the fold of skin over the nail root. And the eponychium is the cuticle, which seals the proximal fold onto the nail body. This is important to provide a seal that prevents infection or dirt or damage to the delicate dividing cells of the nail matrix. Our fingernails and toenails serve a couple of functions. One is that they protect the sensitive ends of our fingers. Think about how many times something damaged a fingernail and think about what that would have done to the actual end of your finger if it wasn't protected by a nail. We can also use our nails as tools. We can use them for scratching, for digging, for picking up things, or in some cases even for defense. The glands associated with the skin are exocrine glands, meaning that they produce a secretion that's going to be released through a duct. The sebaceous glands produce sebum, also known as oil, that is going to help to protect the skin from getting too dry and also to create a protective layer that can inhibit the growth of things like bacteria and fungi on the surface of the skin. The sebaceous glands are holocrine glands. So the holocrine gland contains epithelial cells, in this case modified epidermis cells, that are going to create a secretion, and in order to release that secretion, the entire cell breaks down and releases the secretion. In this case of sebaceous glands, these glands were associated with the hairs, and the oil or the sebum that's produced follows the hair root up to the surface of the skin and then spreads out on the skin from there. We also have sweat glands in the skin, and there are two different types of sweat glands. We have the merocrine sweat glands, also called eccrine glands, and we have apocrine sweat glands. Let's take a look at the eccrine or the merocrine sweat glands first, because these are the most common sweat glands. We have a lot of eccrine sweat glands all over in the skin, and we especially have a lot of them in the forehead, in the palms of the hands, and on the soles of the feet. These glands secrete a watery sweat that contains a lot of salt, sodium and chloride, also potassium, as well as wastes like ammonia and urea. One of the important features of the sweat is that it has a relatively low pH. The pH is in the range of about 4 to 6, so that's fairly acidic. And as this spreads over the skin, it creates what's called the acid mantle. So your skin, the surface of your skin, has a relatively low pH, which is important to help inhibit the growth of fungi and bacteria. There's some sweat being released from your sweat glands almost all the time. Small amounts are released and spread across the skin without us even noticing it. When we typically notice the release of sweat is under conditions of either warm temperature, where we sweat to try and cool the body, or in situations of stress, where the body is preemptively getting ready for action by sweating. This fits with the main functions of the merocrine or eccrine sweat glands, which is to cool the body, to provide protection against infection, and to provide a mechanism to remove waste. The other type of sweat gland, the apocrine sweat glands, are not found all over the body. They tend to be restricted to a few areas, and they're typically associated with hairs. They're associated with the hairs of the beard in men, with the hairs of the axillary region or the armpit, and with the pubic hairs. These apocrine sweat glands secrete a thicker sweat that has more fatty acids in it. And this is what accounts for the name. It was thought that in order to create this sort of fatty sweat, that must be an apocrine type of release, meaning where it pinches off the end of the cell. However, that hasn't been shown to be true. There's actually still some debate about what type of secretion the apocrine sweat glands use. But we do know that it contains these extra fatty acids that aren't found in the sweat from the eccrine sweat glands. These fatty acids provide a nutrient source for bacteria, which will break them down and end up producing odors. So what we associate with the odor of sweat is from the sweat that comes from these apocrine sweat glands. These type of sweat glands do increase their secretions in response to warm temperatures or stress, the way the eccrine sweat glands do, but they also are stimulated to release sweat in response to sexual stimulation, which has led to the hypothesis that these apocrine sweat glands play a role in sexual attraction in some way.